Good afternoon. My presentation is going to focus on a research report that we've done with 96 young people in Ballymun to try and understand, I suppose, their relationship with cannabis. As a group of practitioners, we were experiencing challenges at interagency meetings, and we really wanted to find out what was happening in terms of the young people's relationship with cannabis. But I suppose before I move towards that, there's an international conversation that's happening around cannabis, a global conversation. And again, there's a lot of countries who seem to be moving towards the shift towards legalization, commercialization. In terms of venture capitalists are kind of have this projection around the economic worth of the cannabis industry by 2021 will be 21 billion. There's talk around regulation, there's talk around obviously the medicinal purposes of it. So there's a real kind of global conversation that's happening. So just to begin to bring it into a national context. So this is a very quick search put into the journal.ie, and this is what's happening. This is a flavour of what's happening in terms of the kind of interaction with cannabis, in terms of societal impact, individual interaction with it, what's happening in terms of the economic bit, where there's a lot of kind of money being made for it. It's appearing within our government in terms of leaders' questions, and there's obviously it's appearing a lot more. This kind of scientist has this kind of belief that we can create this international hub where we can create these nice strains of cannabis that will have medicinal purpose. Again, a lot of the opinions can be polarised around cannabis, and this is just a quick illustration. The study that was taken, a Red Sea poll a couple of years ago. So again, gives a nice kind of clear infographics around this conversation that's happening. Again, different political support towards it, whether the parties were leaning more left or more right. People hear me clearly enough? Yeah, okay. So again, there's regional support, different regional support. So I think it's a really interesting, it's a drug that kind of encourages and seems to create an awful lot of conversations. In terms of literature, and again, that's added to this conversation. So this is the international context in terms of an international literature. So I suppose what has been highlighted a lot today has been that it is the most popular drug with young people. And that being the most popular drug, what we're seeing in terms of presentations is that there's more young people presenting for drug treatment, and our national statistics are indicating that also. One particular one was again around this group of daily users. So if you are working with young people and they're presenting in terms of active daily use, that's something that we really need to consider, and that policymakers really need to consider, rather than having, I suppose, this political, maybe neoliberal view towards responding to drug issues. We need to be more robust in our responses and our strategic thinking. Again, trying to bring it a little bit closer, a lot of nice literature that's out there. If you have an interest in it, we spoke a little bit around the young people, they still have that frontal cortex developing, the consequences haven't kind of developed at this point. And again, there's a lot of research that if you have an interest, I'd encourage you to link towards it, that highlights some of these kind of challenges that present for young people in terms of the impact on the developing brain. Another couple of pieces, and Bobby mentions this morning, Vault-Face, and there may be another agenda to it in terms of what they produce in terms of as a policy hub, but I think it's an interesting read. I think all these are very interesting articles if you have an interest in relation to exploring cannabis in a deeper way. So they're up there for you, Hannah. These are particular I suppose, pieces of research that I came across that I was interested in. And again, it's kind of just backing up what I've been originally saying. And maybe this kind of the role that CBT has in it, because when I talk a little bit more around the results of the research report, a lot of the young kids actually, they like being, the identity of being a stoner. Actually, they're not really enjoying the effect of it because of the fact that it's so high potent in terms of the THC content. But if there was a more balanced strain, had more of a CBT that has kind of less of the impact in terms of psychosis, that might be more of a natural fit for them in terms of the experience of the substance. So, just wanted to bring us in alongside with the international context and in terms of the literature that's emerging. So, as a practitioner, drugs worker, working within the community in just outside North Inner City of Dublin, we sit around an interagency process that focuses on young people that are early school leavers. There's 2 of these pilot projects, one in Dublin, and then there's one in Mayo, which is just obviously within your region. And I think when I was considering, and we were talking around coming down and having a role in the day, I think a comparative study would be really interesting, if that would be something that maybe the Equal Youth, I don't know, was anybody here part of the Equal Youth initiative in Mayo? No? Okay. So this is what we do. We sit around the table once a month and we focus on early school leavers that fit into these 3 different areas. And, you know, there's some that are doing really well and have moved into the workforce, and really there's no attention on them. There is some that are in this yellow light kind of area, and we need to put a little bit of focus on them and develop a skill set to get them job ready. But the priority and where most of our work appears is within this red light area. So that's where most of our conversations happen. And what was happening at the meetings was that we were noticing that there was a huge group that weren't moving on, weren't continuing to attain an education, were struggling, were disconnected from services, were appearing to be unmotivated, and were really struggling to make appointments no matter where they were meant to be attending. There was also this understanding between drugs workers, and it was being mirrored within families too, that it was only weed, and that's where the actual name for the report came. If he's up in his bedroom smoking a bit of weed, I'm okay with that. He's not using some of the more headline problematic substances. So it created this understanding, this belief system in young people that actually it was an okay drug to interact with. And it came at the time when the high strains of high potency cannabis was appearing within our communities. So I suppose what we decided to do was develop a subgroup that would focus particularly on the cannabis and the connection to that. Just in terms of the overall, it's a really comprehensive subgroup that do meet both voluntary, statutory, Garda involvement in it. We have social welfare involvement in it. So the radar is very, very tight. So we can't keep these young people on this radar. So just very quickly in terms of responses, so this is what we've done to date up before the research. So we formed, we discussed, we wanted to, I suppose, bring information into the community and try and, I suppose, increase the knowledge base there. We delivered some training workshops, so a lot of practitioners were saying, how do we work with, I don't really have a skill set to work with this. We've done that. We initiated a Pacific Cannabis Behaviour Programme, which is connected to ACRA. And obviously the behaviour change pattern that's linked to that. We worked with young people, we had a Cannabis Awareness Week, we had a couple of conferences, and we were involved in a self-reporting tool, Cannabis and Me. So we'd done all that, and there was still these group of young kids who weren't interacting, still really challenged by their relationship with weed. So there was a question from one of the subgroup, would you come back in? So Outreach would be involved in it, would you come back in and deliver an input? And I questioned again the effectiveness of a one-off input. What are we going to get from it? What are the young people going to get from it? And really, is it something that is going to be effective? So rather than that, we wanted to get a real picture of what was happening with young people and their relationship with cannabis. So we decided to put together a rapid assessment to try and understand what this relationship would be. It was done across 3 sites as we moved through the actual tool. So a little bit of the methods, how we done it, how we went about it. We got into 2 training centres. We also got out onto the street, because when we were bringing back each data set, there was, I suppose, a reflection around, well, what about the young kids that aren't engaged, that are just on street corners and that? So we ended up in 3 different data sites. And a challenge was, I suppose, as the research was coming back in, we had to amend the questionnaire as we were moving along. So we ended up with a nice data set from 3 different sites. The key findings were that, I suppose, that the street group were using the most in terms of the 3 sites, that out of the 53 participants that were using regularly, there was a potential that they were spending upwards of 327,000 a year, which again links with what Brian was talking around, the influence and the impact of drug debt and drug debt intimidation that families and communities are experiencing because of the influence that this drug market is having. 19% were reporting drug deaths ranging from 50 to 1,000. And again, if you can understand for a young person in terms of what actually money might be available to them. I was talking to a colleague from Tipperary, and they were saying a small town recently, I think there was a drug debt of €30, and there was a young person taken off into a field, and there was a beating there. So again, I think it's really important to localise it in terms of your own communities and what's happening there. So another question that we had was, well then, if it's important, if change was important to you, what might kind of be areas that would, I suppose, we need to think about? Financial, employment and physical health were some of the areas. And financial might not mean give me money, it might mean I'm making money from this industry. What will you replace in terms of that? So maybe we need to think a little bit about that. Very quickly move through. Are we okay on time? Okay, yeah. So in terms of the data set, so this is what we interviewed 96 people. Again, 78% of them had used weed in their lifetime, 22% hadn't. And I think a question came up this morning, and again, another really interesting research project may be, what's happening within this other group, or coming from the same community, probably have some peers interacting with them. It could be a really nice research project to do. These were the different sites where we went and done the research. So, and it was a really brave thing, I think, for the managers to do, was to say, okay, come in, we'll open our doors and give us kind of the reality of what's happening with our young people in our community. So in doing that, it allowed us to interact with the participants that were doing it, and it was anonymous, so they could come in, or they could choose, self-select whether they wanted to engage in it either. So I suppose that just gave us the story of what was happening in each data site in terms of if they ever used. Onset of use, there was I suppose there was a range there from 12, and then for some people it was latter, so around 7, 18. And again, we didn't delve into, because it was a rapid assessment, we didn't delve into actually what that was about. Was that about that they joined a particular training centre? Was that about an environment? So we didn't really thrash that out. Very slide just in terms of the gender and the age profile. So there wasn't a lot of girls engaged in it. They decided kind of opt out of that, but again, that was just a feature of it. So as part of RAP assessment, we need to find out, so what's your pattern of use? What's happening here in this interaction? And again, there's not a lot that this tells us other than this group, this daily users, which again, the research is saying we need to focus on these guys, because again, this is where most impact and effects will occur. And I suppose training centre A was an obvious kind of what was happening within this training centre, where there was a greater amount of use compared to training centre B. Another important question for us was that, so how long you spend in the day stoned? You're smoking this much daily, so how much of the day you spend in stoned? And again, this is a kind of nice graph that illustrates, obviously, there was a lot of these young people spending a lot of the day stoned under the influence of a high potency strain of weed. This slide just looks more at the daily user, so that's where our priority was at that moment. And again, these are just selected slides that are pulled from that. So they're smoking every day, they're smoking more than 6 hours a day, and they're smoking more than upwards of 1.5 to 2 grams, which is a huge amount of the substance that they're ingesting, particularly considering the strain. So it's no wonder that they're maybe not turning up, and they're appearing unmotivated, and they're disengaging from services. So we wanted to know, if we want to really understand the relationship, so what is it? What is it? Why do you use? What are the important things around using? And this is what the data set told us. So again, you can see for yourself, one, I think interesting thing for me was that again, there's some less psychological reasons what people were using, but the thing around being stoned actually wasn't up there. So if we go back to the bit around, they are smoking this high potency strain of cannabis, and actually they don't like the effect of it. So I suppose that told its own story. I think this slide brings it back to the kind of remark that Brian made earlier on, and this is a report from the EMC DDA around European drug markets. And again, it really shines this kind of light on the drug market and in relation to cannabis. So this is what's happening within our communities. This is what's happening across Europe. So it's a huge it's huge economic worth it has in terms of EU drug markets. what it meant for the participants that took part in our research report was that this is what they, on average, so when we condensed all the numbers around the active average users, this is what the data told us. So most young people, if they're in the training centre, are probably getting in around that 5,000 mark over a year in terms of their payments. So for most of our users, every penny they were getting was getting spent on weed. And this just kind of pushes it out in terms of the 53, and the reason it's 53 and not 58 was that some were obviously not spending that on the weed, or else have had kind of other ways that they were, I suppose, engaging with it in order not to pay for it. So again, ending up at this figure of over 327,000 being spent annually within this small subgroup. This bar chart just again illustrates what each training centre A, what the participant was getting, what type of average spend, and what was their drug debt connecting. So for the people on the street, they were kind of, I suppose, the important thing was that they were actually in less drug debt than what some of the participants within training centre A was. So reasons to change, that was that question that I probed in terms of the key findings, and this is what the participants were telling us in terms of what was important, in terms of what may nudge them towards having some change in their use patterns. I suppose this diagram illustrates, so we know what the data was, we understood what it was, but what happened? What was the process? What was the timeline in terms of a group of practitioners who knew what was happening within this community, and how do we come about creating some community change? So this just as an illustration, this was part of a poster that we got to present at the Lisbon Addictions a couple of weeks ago. It was just one part of it, but I think it clearly moves through the different steps that was a process for us in terms of trying to create a coherent response within the community in Dublin. I think this is something significant, and I only came across this recently when we were over in Lisbon, was that for the first time ever, it's been recognised in terms of policy briefings at a European level that we need to have a bottom-up response in terms of our thinking, in terms of our strategic thinking. But for me, there's no point in having that if there's not a political will to do it either. So I think we need to meet somewhere in the middle. But I suppose I was enthused to be seeing that there's literature now saying that we now need to rethink how we are responding at a political level. So I might give you an opportunity now to, this funding challenge that's there. I suppose there's policymakers at a European level saying that now we need to be orchestrating that from a bottom up in terms of creating impact. So for us, it was really about, so we got all the data, how do we create this community change? And in order to do that, the report had to clearly identify what the recommendations were. So we now know that this is a very different substance than what it was back in the day when mum and dad are having a joint. It's kind of a bit harsh, it's fine. It's a very different substance. The makeup is very different, the impacts are very different. So we need to create and change the current knowledge base around that within our communities, within our family support networks, within practitioners also, within the social work team. So we really need to focus on that and begin to drive that. We need to rethink, and again, Michal, you mentioned around I suppose the role that you guys have in terms of prevention and the strengths that you have around that. So we're in that phase now where we have begun to look at the role of prevention and the role of early intervention in terms of impacting on this. We really need to focus on these group of targeted daily users. We know they're using a lot of the substance. We know we're spending a lot of time stoned, so we need to put something really coherent in to be able to respond to them. And cannabis now has a place within I suppose, problematic substances. It's appearing now. It's very topical. There is this global conversation, but the importance is that it kind of sustains itself there and it doesn't drift away. So one of our recommendations is that how do we go about maintaining that? So beyond the recommendations, it's how do we communicate that and begin to create a national conversation about it, and that's what we've been doing. That's what I suppose what I was invited here today to do. So we're continuing to do that. in terms of actions as based with the recommendations, we've now updated the community addiction study. So there was an old kind of there was an old delivery content that was included within the addiction studies level 5, and we've updated that. So that's delivered nationally in terms of people that have an interest in drugs work. We now have 2 dedicated reduced use workers within the training centre. So both the training centres that took part in the research report now have 2 practitioners that are trained in the reduced use. We're working at the minute in terms of a collaborative expert group to look at the daily users in terms of what we need to put together for them. And there is this scoping exercise that's done with our local P&E chair and our local P&E worker to look at actually what is the reality of what's being delivered within curriculum, within schools and within community-based organisations. Couple of references beyond the website if you want to click on them. I think they're really helpful pieces. If you want some reports or anything like that, sure, you can contact me there. Thank you.